attending. I'm assuming everybody can hear me all right. Um, I believe so, since I've been getting some chats here telling me that elevator music would be appreciated. So, well, thanks again for joining us this morning. This is one of our monthly Coffee with Eagles webinars, and today, with the pleasure of also having Spectra on with us. I'm going to get things kick-started and just do a quick run-through of who Eagle is for those who maybe are not familiar with who we are. And then I'll pass it over to David Feller. He is engineer extraordinaire at Spectra, and then Eric Collette, who is marketing extraordinaire for Spectra. So that's a fun word to spell. Definitely had spell check help me with that one. So Eagle Technologies, we've been around since 1981. I always joke that seems like forever for me because I wasn't even born yet. It was a twinkle in my mom's eye at that point, you know. But the cool thing is we've had those same founding fathers that are still part of the company today. You know, our three founders, they still are very heavily involved in the business. They're engineers. You know, you're probably familiar and deal with them on a day-to-day basis, whether you're dealing with support, some of our installs, or on the pre-sale side. So it's really cool to see kind of their involvement and obviously shaping the company and keeping it moving forward. We've obviously evolved over the decades. Can't stay very stagnant in IT, that's for sure, as IT is just constantly evolving. Every year it seems like things get out of date pretty quickly. And one thing though that we've always had a commitment to is, our customers. We always want to do what's right with our customers. We want to make sure that you guys are satisfied, that we have that long-standing relationship with our customers. We don't want to just, push paper and sell your product. We really want to be involved, get to know you, get to know your environment, get to know your families even. I love the relationship side of this business. It's really been great. Obviously on the business side, what we focus on is the data center. We focus on really your data. So we know it's the lifeblood of your organization, and it's something that's very critical to keeping your business afloat and keeping your business, making money. And so whether that's the infrastructure that is needed to serve that data, to service the applications, it's the disaster recovery and business continuity plans to ensure that when disaster does strike, what are you going to do in the meantime? Obviously, as data is growing, we need to manage it, whether it's living out on the edge or whether it's living in your data center or in the cloud. And so there's a lot of moving parts with this, and that's where we take pride in really understanding this and understanding and listening to what our customers are needing and trying to find the best solution for their needs. We add value. We really try to be your advocate. I joke that vendors call us all the time, as if much as they would like for you to buy their product, they'd much rather have somebody else do the selling for them. And so we're constantly vetting new technologies. I just had a call yesterday with another company that wants Eagle to, pitch its product. And so we go through these. It seems like weekly we're always looking at some new product or doing some kind of conversation with the vendor to see if it really is something that we want to put our name, our reputation behind. Does it meet a need for our customers? And maybe it meets a need and it's a better product than something we already have on our portfolio. And so maybe we need to kind of move away from some of the legacy products that we've been offering. So this is something constantly that we're evaluating. We do like to go deep on our core products as well. That gives us the expertise to ensure that we know what we're presenting to you is going to work like we want it to, and we promise it's going to work. We want to make sure that's designed the proper way for your environment, things like that. So it allows us to be involved up front heavily, in the discovery work and the design work, education, and then also after the sale, we're going to come on and do the install for you if you need it. We're going to support you and continue to do training and other events around products to ensure that you have the information that you need to succeed. Obviously, we're very technical focused in the engineering, aspect, but we also want to help bridge that gap because a lot of times, being engineer, system admins, and different roles, you have certain things you care about, and your boss cares about slightly different things. You know, how much does it cost? Does it mitigate risk? You know, does it allow us to be more agile? Things like that, that we need to help be that Google Translate, if you will, between what you care about and then what they care about. And so let us help, because we realize that just because we have the what we believe is a technical win and the best product for your environment, there's other things that they might be concerned about that we need to work through as well, to obviously, you know, get that technology in for you to start running with. Our motto has always been people making technology easy, you know, whether that's from the best of breed solutions that we choose to offer and choose to have experience in, the services that we offer, you know, whether they're just fully turnkey or working alongside with your resources to help train you and help make you, you know, again, more educated so that you spend less time having to manage something. Or the support, you know, we try to be that single pane of glass for you guys, where you guys can call into our support, the people that know your environment pretty well, have done the install, you know, versus somebody that really doesn't know who you are at all. So we try to do a lot of these events as well, where they become educational. I know obviously there's always some sales pitch to something, but we try to keep it where we're always talking about technology. You know, today's presentation is going to be about tape, about cloud, and just giving you some education around things that we're seeing out there. We try to do vendor agnostic presentations as well, where we're not pitching a specific product, but we're just trying to educate folks on what we're seeing in the marketplace and things we're considering. And so hopefully we'll see you guys in person, whether it's a lunch event, happy hour, these webinars, whatever it might be. We love having you guys attend and listen in. So here's a quick snapshot of some of our primary vendors. Obviously, Spectra is one of our key partners. It's interesting, they were actually our first partner, I believe, that actually got us on the reseller train back in 1990. So we've had a long partnership with them, and love the people we work with there. They make a great product as well. So that is all I have for now. I'm going to pass it over to Eric and David. And while they start getting ready for their presentation, wanted to fill you in on a couple things. So obviously, people have already figured out how to use the chat. If you guys have questions, feel free to throw those into the Q&A, and I will interrupt as needed to get those answered. We'll try to get them answered live for everybody. Vocally answering is typically easier, and you get more context than just typing an answer back. And then we're also going to pop some polls up. So the first one that we're going to pop up, I'll do right now, is around ransomware. So I'm going to launch this, and we have a couple other polls we're going to launch throughout the process. And the idea here is answer as you like. We're going to share the results. They're going to be shared anonymously throughout the presentation, so we can kind of talk about the results as they come in, and kind of keep it interactive. And we're also going to, so another thing is pay attention, because we're also playing a game at the end, and you have a chance to win a prize. So the questions and answers, or the answers to the questions, are going to be sprinkled through this presentation today. So give away some really cool prizes at the end. So anyway, I will pass the torch over, and thank you guys again for attending.
Howdy, everybody. This is David Feller, and I have with me Eric Paulette. I run product management for Spectralogic. I'm kind of the product guy at the company. And Eric runs product marketing for us. So we're more of a technical group than a sales group sitting in front of you. Going to talk a little bit about a variety of different technologies. A lot on the cloud, a lot on reasons to use it, the right way to use it. If we go back just 5 years, as everybody knows, the cloud kind of happened fast. But if you go back 5 years, a lot of the technology companies, us included, started scrambling for how do we address the cloud, and what does this mean, and how are people going to use it? And a lot of companies started with Well, let me tell you the 10 reasons you shouldn't use the cloud. Well, that absolutely is not the case. In fact, we are one of the biggest users of the cloud with our products, and a lot of the things you'll see going forward have a cloud component. Even if we're selling, disk or tape or some local storage, there's a cloud component in everything. Not only do we utilize it for essentially command and control, having a hybrid cloud solution is the way to go. It's the only option to at least consider the right ways to use the cloud. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about that today. We're going to flip through a variety of different topics that give you some real live numbers and statistics that you can use in your daily work. We're going to talk about what's going on in data security, focusing a little bit on ransomware. I still feel that a lot of people are not putting the focus on protecting against ransomware that they should. We all think, oh, that's a big company thing, or they're going after hospitals or whatever it is. They're going after everybody, and this is something everybody is subject to. And we're going to give you some statistics that, quite frankly, could scare you a little bit, but you need to prepare for how that's done and how to protect yourself against it. We will, of course, talk to you about how various Spectra products fit in, but we're going to end up with some case studies and some cost studies as well, because part of the question is, how do I use the cloud right? How do I do this right? And how do I do it right for my company? And we've got some suggestions for you and some actual real world numbers on costs that I think will really open your eyes a little bit about how and when to use the cloud. So let me pop over to Eric. He's our expert on the, essentially, we call it internally the cloud versus on-prem, debate. Obviously, the answer is both. But we're going to run through this with you and make sure, feel free to ask questions. There's a comment section where you can ask questions as we go, because I think everybody's muted, but we really would love for it to be interactive and help you work through the problems that you have. So Eric, take her away.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Thank you, Anthony, for the nice introduction at the beginning as well. So we really, again, as David mentioned here at SpectraLogic, we believe that understanding the cloud is the best way to be able to effectively use it. So until people understand what the cloud is and where its vulnerabilities are and where its advantages are, it's hard to effectively use the cloud. And security has been very top of mind on a lot of organizations and a lot of IT people that are managing cloud and managing their data infrastructures. And cloud data breaches, they are common. There's no doubt about it, whether it's manual setup problems or actual hackers getting in and sharing your data. They are just a fact of life when dealing with the cloud. So data that is in the cloud needs to be encrypted. IT staffers need to understand the cloud. They need to really become cloud experts. And there's just really no safe way to prevent ransomware unless you have an offline copy. And tape provides a encrypted air gap, which is a very common term that you'll hear as far as there is no way for a hacker to get to that data. If it is not online, there's no way for them to get to the information. So keeping an offline copy is a fantastic way to protect your data. We have a number of statistics that you'll see throughout this, and one fun thing to know about these is all the stats that we have come in the last 6 to 8 months. These are all at the end of 2018, early 2019 statistics, so these are current. The FBI reports that there are more than 4,000 ransomware attacks that occur daily in the United States of America. So if, as David mentioned earlier, if you think that you aren't a big enough company or you aren't a potential target, everybody is a potential target for ransomware. Some of the big companies like Merck, Maersk, and FedEx, they each reported third quarter losses in 2018 of around $300 million. This was purely a result of the NotPetya ransomware virus that was very common in the second half of 2018. And these three companies each got hit with massive ransomware attacks and paid over $300 million to get the data back. So what happens when you actually pay a ransomware ransom? Well, 93% of the time, you will get the de-encryption tool. They will give you the tool to get your data back, and then you can begin the de-encryption and restoration. but only 86% of the time that you actually get that tool is the data recoverable. Oftentimes, the data that a hacker encrypts is then corrupted, inadvertently deleted, some way that you do not have the ability to restore your data. So even by paying the ransom, 93% of the time you'll get it, and then when you get the tool, only 86% of the time you will actually be able to recover your data. So, how do you find a way to protect it from getting that, getting ransomed and getting encrypted and having your data stolen, essentially? Well, backup is a great way, but then ransomware people and cyber criminals found ways to follow backup files. We know that different backup providers have different file extensions that they put onto their backups, and so do the criminals. So the ransomware attacks on backups have increased by over 39% in the last year, and 75% of organizations that paid a ransom had their backups compromised. So this is very important. I mean, again, it goes back to finding a way to give an air gap and prevent the data from even being accessible. Because when your data is encrypted, there's downtime that's associated to that. And the average downtime associated with encrypted backups and ransomware has increased by 47%. Not just due to the frequency of the attacks, but where the systems were completely wiped. It's just become more of a complex, more of a in-depth attack on people's infrastructures, not just focusing on primary storage, but finding backups, finding backup files. So I'll pause and I'll pass it over to Anthony. Anthony, do you want to talk about some of the results that we saw around ransomware?
Yeah, so I ended up sharing it a little bit early, but if everybody, let me just reshare really quick. So it pops back up on everybody's screen. So, so quite a bit of people have been hit by ransomware already and have had to deal with it and kind of force it off and recover. A lot of people said they would report it. Just interesting, I mean, I guess if you recover quickly, do you report it? Which is interesting now in some of those numbers, where they're coming up with, the average daily attacks. Is that based on reporting? Is that based on, like them tracking the dark web? And it's interesting how they kind of gather those numbers, and maybe those numbers even low, depending on who actually reports it and who recovers on their own. And then it's interesting, some of the confident results, we have some 100% confident. I'm assuming they have multiple different places they can pull back from, an air gap being one of them. And then you can see it kind of dwindles down where we have some that, it's hard to know. You could act confident, but when it comes down to it, would you really be able to recover? And obviously there's some people that are kind of down in there as well.
All right, fantastic. So next, we've got kind of a first-hand account. This was a blog that I found that was just in December of 2018, and this was a organization that was really hit hard with ransomware. So a lot of words, but very pointed details of how he went through his process, what happened, and how he ended up recovering his data. So the company was hit with ransomware, and everything powered on was completely encrypted across 7 subnets, networks, hundreds of machines. Literally, the intruder gained access to the SAN storage application, removed snapshots. The Veeam server they were using was completely encrypted. The NAS backup volumes of Veeams were not just encrypted, they were deleted. So they had no data stored anywhere. So then he decides to go to his remote site of the company, and that was also hit. No data at all. So this guy is sitting here feeling like he had done a lot. He had multiple copies in multiple locations, doing replication over distance. He felt like he was very protected, but in reality, he was screwed. Everything was backed up in these 2, 3, 4 places. He had some backup tapes of their mission critical information, some file storage, HR data, ERP services. These are things that, cannot easily be rebuilt or reinstalled. And so they had some long-term tapes that they had kept on a shelf. There was no intent to ever use those tapes, but that was their only way back. They never thought that they would need him again, but that was the only thing that he could do, and that was the only way to get back up and running to any extent. This was not a full restore. This was not a full disaster recovery restore where everything came back to the way it was before. They had to continue to build afterwards, but at least they had some building blocks, some foundations. And the only way that happened is because those tapes were sitting on a shelf. They believed that spreading their data across multiple locations was all that was needed to secure it, when in reality, anything that was online was completely and totally attacked and either deleted or encrypted, and they were really stuck in a tough situation. So, I mean, what does this mean for the future? And MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they had a review, and they basically said cyber criminals will target software as a service and cloud computing business, which store and secure private data. This is where the hackers are going. So just understand that if you're looking at the cloud, understand what data it is that you're putting into the cloud. This is a storage target that has a giant bullseye on it. People want to be the one to hack Amazon. They want to be the one to hack Microsoft Azure, Google. So understand that sensitive data maybe is not the best thing to put in the cloud. There are great reasons to use the cloud. I mean, distribution, compute power, there are tons of advantages to the cloud. Just understand what it is that you're putting up there and understand the risks associated with it as well. So the next one that we get into is performance. Performance is always something that is top of mind to many organizations, because when you need something, you want to be able to have it when you want it. So we've seen kind of an interesting shift when we get to the cloud and speeds and performances. Storing data in the cloud and bandwidth to and from the cloud, it seems like when you're storing data, everything is fast enough. Local storage will always be the fastest, but when they're going to the cloud, it seems to work well. They can trickle data up, they can move it as data is being created and generated and move it to the cloud. But what about retrieving data? And this is where cloud vendors make their money. There is no argument about it. Egress fees, as it's often called, retrieving data, get costs, these are all the things that cloud vendors make their money on. So, cloud speeds, they may be inadequate for a disaster. We'll see in a second how quickly you can restore data, whether it's on-prem or in a cloud. So it's important to understand and have a recovery time objective. How quickly do you need the data back before your operations grind to a halt? Store in the cloud, but retrieve locally. It's a great kind of fundamental idea to use, because again, the costs and the time associated with it. And one of the things here at Spectra that we always like to talk about is there is no internet connection out there right now that's as fast as a truck full of tapes driving down the highway. It's just, you can move petabytes of data in hours when you're doing it that way, and there's just nothing out there that is as efficient and as fast and affordable as that. So if you need to switch to another cloud vendor, how do you do it? Cloud vendors can be proprietary in a format, but it's more in cost that locks you in. So keeping a local copy will allow you to move to another cloud freely at your choice. So when we talk about kind of that bandwidth, the speed of moving data, you'll hear about a gigabit Ethernet system that can move about 10.8 terabytes a day. OC48 line, which is relatively expensive, you get 2.5 gigs a second. You can move 27 terabytes a day. You compare that to an LTO8 tape drive, a single LTO8 tape drive that's 360 meg a second native. That'll get you 31 terabytes a day. So if we look at it, what does it take to move a petabyte or 500 terabytes? You are finding that the bottleneck now is no longer your system. It is the connection you have to the cloud if you're using that for a disaster recovery situation. And then when we look at, just a single LTO8 tape drive is 3 times the performance of a dedicated a gig WAN. It's easy and affordable to add additional tape drives to scale up your performance, whereas expanding your internet connection can be complicated. Oftentimes you would need to, run new lines or something like that. This is a very easy way to scale up performance if you need it, by adding additional tape drives and remove complexity from a corporate-wide project and focus in on where the importance is in restoring data, speed, but cost as well. So I'll pass it back over to, David.
I was going to say, there's a really interesting thing on this chart that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to. Obviously, Spectra is heavily into all kinds of storage, NAS disk, object storage. We've got multi-site replication devices. One of the things that we still sell a lot of, and it's still part of a lot of data centers, is tape. And the speed of tape actually stuns people now. LTO-8, the latest drives, are good for 360 megabyte per second per tape drive. Now, even compared to disk, a single disk usually is on the order of 150 to 170 megabyte per second. So oddly enough, tape is actually faster in a linear, how fast can I shove stuff in it or get it out? Tape is actually faster than a typical disk system. And you can put lots of tape drives in a library, which we'll show you here in a minute. But our largest systems, the large T-Finities, hold hundreds of tape drives. So for the big customers, CERN, and the guys that store just tremendous amount of data, they're actually using tape libraries. Hold on to your socks, because they're so fast of doing bulk data. So this is a really interesting chart. There is a difference here between native and compressed. So if you allow the tape drive to compress and you have compressible data, then really you almost get limited by the pipe heading into the drive. Because we're doing compression on the fly on the drive itself, you can handle almost gigabyte per second speeds in and out of a single tape drive. But let's give you a quick look at one of it's the low to mid-range tape library system. This is where a lot of people start. We call it a stack. So it starts with a 6U device, holds essentially 80 tapes in that 6U, and then you can essentially expand it. We'll just go right to we can expand it to multiple of these media devices that essentially the first one comes with covers on the top and the bottom. And if you need to go beyond that 80 tapes, it's not a problem. You yank the cover off, you put another one of these expander units on, and then the robot is allowed to crawl. So it's also fun, when your kids come to visit you, because robots are cool. There's just no way around that. But our library system expands up to 42 of these tape drives. So if you look in the very bottom, just expanding on the speed, 42 tape drives at LTO-8 using compression gets you 31 and a half, almost 32 gigabytes per second. That's a number most people don't associate with tape. Certainly you use tape differently. It's not a random access. But if you're storing bulk data, if you're doing backups, if you're taking critical data and trying to get it either offline or onto a secure place, then tape really is a very efficient way to go about doing this. So this is just to give you a feel for what we offer in this particular space.
And as we've heard, tape is dead. I'm sure everybody's heard that a lot of times. Well, the cloud providers are well aware that tape is not dead, so they continue to come out with new offerings, new ways of attracting business. So what is it that they do to really hone in on business and hone in on the ability to capture new audiences for the cloud market? So they came out with the Amazon Deep Archive. This was announced in November of 2018, but didn't become generally available until May 1st of this year. So just over a month this has been available now. They talk about a tenth of a cent a gigabyte, $1.01 per terabyte per month of storage costs. They talk about that this is bulk storage, long-term storage. It'll take you about 12 hours to get the data back on a standard retrieval. And it's really meant to be a long-term storage target. So this is primarily what Amazon would show at their announcement. David?
So just to clarify, in case everybody hasn't heard about this, it didn't make as much press as I think as Amazon expected. So they currently have 3 levels, right? S3 is the primary level, relatively expensive. It's basically fast access. It's ready access disk. A lot of websites actually run right from S3. They have IA, so an intermediate one where it's an in-between level. And quite frankly, I think a lot of companies haven't figured out how to use that in an efficient way. And then they have Glacier. So Glacier is that longer-term storage that's been roughly a penny a gig a month on that order, or some percentage of that. But it's really slow access. You have to wait, hours to get things back. And essentially, the way most people use Glacier is you say, hey, I want something back from Glacier, so that you issue the order, it pulls it back and puts it in the S3 layer, and then you retrieve it from there. And Amazon realized, I think, that really wasn't quite good enough, and so they've launched this deep archive. So we're, I guess, helping them to some extent, showing how this deep archive works, and we're going to talk about how it really fits into a normal data center.
Yeah, and some of the things that are interesting with Amazon, they will tell you what they want you to see, and oftentimes they will hide what they don't want you to see as long as possible. So what we saw in the previous slide as far as storage and access time, that was what was announced in November. It wasn't until the actual general availability date that they announced what is it that it's going to cost to access your data. Because storing data in Deep Archive is cheap, but when you need to access it, it's going to cost you twice as much as Amazon Glacier, just their traditional Glacier tier, and take 3 times as long to access it. So I know you're saying, hold on a second, this doesn't make sense. This is their newest tier, it's the most affordable one, but if I need to access it, it's going to be twice as much. And that's the case. A standard Glacier retrieval will take you 3 to 5 hours and cost you 1 penny per gigabyte. A Deep Archive retrieval, which is a fraction of the cost to store, it'll take you 3 times longer at 12 hours and cost you 2 cents a gigabyte. So this goes back to the idea that cloud providers make their money on the back end. They will most likely soon be giving away free storage, just because the fact that all the other services, all the other times that your single file or object would be charged, they will make up that money 10 times over than what it would cost to store. So let's look at what does it look like for a file or an object when you store data in the cloud. So you can move it into S3, that's usually free. If you need to move it to another tier like Glacier or Deep Archive, you're going to pay per request to do that. So there's one time that your data is being charged. If you're coming from a file system and you need to go through an object gateway, you get some free access to that, but otherwise you're going to pay per file on that one once you've reached your top amount. There's always storage. Again, this is what they talk about. This is their #1 marketing first step, all this kind of stuff. That's what they talk about. That's what you see. But that's already now the 3rd time that your object or your file has been charged, and that's every month. Then you want to get it back, you have to make it accessible. You're going to get charged per request. And then if you actually want to access that data, it's going to move to another tier of storage that's deemed one of their accessible tiers, their infrequent access tiers. That's a cost per gigabyte that one's going to be moved over and stored on. And then there's also storage on that next tier. That's a per month charge. So you're at least getting hit with 1 month for every file that is restored. There's also a fun fact about minimum file size. So if you are storing data in Glacier or Deep Archive, 90K is the smallest file size. Regardless of what you move into there, if it's a 2K file, it will then be a 90K file. When you go to restore it, it goes to one of the IA tiers. That has 128K minimum file size. So now all of a sudden, a bunch of small files has ballooned up and become a massive storage set without you even knowing. So we continue down the line and we look at the number of times if you want to store it, again, continue to store the data you're being charged per month. Anytime the data is manipulated and you have to move it back to that secondary tier, you're going to be paid per request as well. Storage cost continues. If you want multiple copies in multiple locations, you're just multiplying your storage bill by however many copies you want. So that one number that they throw out there at the beginning of 1/10 of a cent a gig, that is nothing in the big picture of how many times your data is charged when it goes into the cloud. So again, we can look at the storage because the storage itself, it's still nothing to sneeze at. I mean, if we're looking at long-term data, data that needs to be kept for extensive periods of times, whether it's for retention requirements, grant requirements, or just a general corporate policy that they want to keep data, then we need to look at how much it costs over time. So yeah, here's a look at Amazon Glacier at 1 petabyte and 500 terabytes, and then the Deep Archive. This is no recall, no access, no transfer fees. This is just pure storage, no bandwidth, and then you can look at it and, over 10 years, if you want to keep your data, a petabyte's going to cost you over $121,000 on their cheapest storage offering. And then again, no access or anything. So cloud has this great low upfront cost, but it really does start to add up over time. Tape is the opposite, high upfront cost, but lower overall cost of ownership. So as cloud storage has many additional charges, the tape storage that you have, you buy it once. It doesn't matter how many times you access it, how many times you write to it. It's yours, you own it. So that's why that hybrid cloud model, keeping a local copy, never retrieving from a cloud, is really a fantastic use case. It's at its core just a great sound best practice when using the cloud. Keep a local copy and never be held hostage. So as we look at maybe some of the companies that previously had been held hostage and had to make a decision about the cloud, here are 3 very public cloud departures that we've seen over the last 3 years, let's say. I think the oldest one is about 3 years ago that it happened, and other ones are more recent. But we see people leaving the cloud for a number of different reasons. Competition, they want a cloud diversity, genetic diversity, as Spectra likes to talk about a lot of times. There's cost, and then there's the expectations. Cloud oftentimes carries this great perception in people's minds of how perfect it is. It does everything. It's exactly what I need, and I only pay for what I need. When you get in, you sometimes find out that that's not the case. So we look at Apple, Dropbox, and Tingo as 3 companies who went all in on the cloud and then decided to scale back for whatever reason. So Apple, they went 100% to Amazon's cloud. They met some resistance as far as competition. Amazon was at the time not carrying any Apple products. So an Apple TV, a phone, iPads, any of these things were not being sold on Amazon. And so, but yet Apple was paying them for all their storage. And they said, something doesn't quite feel right about this. So they decided that they were going to pull back and move to another cloud system. So evaluated Google and Microsoft. And then in that evaluation, they realized, why are we going to move to somebody else's cloud? Why don't we just build our own? I mean, this is ridiculous. We're storing so much data. Why are we just going to pay somebody else to store our data? So that's when they began construction of their new Apple data centers. In the interim, they moved out of AWS and went into a diverse cloud offering where they had a little bit of Amazon, primarily Google and Microsoft as their 2 primary cloud providers, all with the goal of bringing data to their own data centers and only keeping the data in the cloud that they deemed cloud ready, instantly accessible and things like that. Another one that did this, Dropbox, a company that you think of as the cloud, went 100% cloud and then ends up pulling 90% of the data back. They didn't realize how expensive it was going to be to stay in the cloud. A quote from one of their VPs of infrastructure says that it doesn't mean the cloud has disadvantages. Public cloud provides what Dropbox calls tolls on using the data. These were those 7 and 8 and 9 different times your data is being charged. They referred to them as tolls. They had 40 petabytes that they pumped up to the cloud when they first began using the cloud, and this was in 2012. And within 4 years, they decided that this was not the right option for them, and they had to pull all but 10% of their data back. They called it Operation Magic Pocket. It was their way of literally downloading all of their data and erecting their own private data center to hold all of the current information that's held in Dropbox. They needed it for not only expense, but they needed to build something that could store in a safe and secure manner and make it highly available. There's a great blog that Dropbox wrote about this. It's still on their website, and it really goes through, they have an addition to it that shows a step-by-step process on what was their thinking, what was their implementation plan of pulling out of the cloud. They go through a cost analysis and look at, should we trickle our data out of the cloud, or should we pull it all back as fast as possible? And pulling it back as fast as possible was the most affordable way, because leaving it in the cloud and incurring the the storage charges was going to add up over time. So they had a lot of analysis around how to pull out of the cloud because nobody had really done that before. And then here's a company that learned from Dropbox. They took a lot of what they were doing on how they pulled out of the cloud and applied it to themselves. They found out that the performance and the network stability in Amazon was not what they were looking for. They needed a more higher performing system. This is a file sharing company that does a lot of large packet transfers, as they call them. So the costs were getting out of hand in Amazon because they were sending data back and forth and transferring it and getting hit with those egress fees. But then they also were running into underperformance. I mean, when they went to their own independent data center, they were finding a 30–40% increase in performance and it coming in at 15% cheaper. They had disk usage that was 92% cheaper. I mean, these stats are just, this is not a drop in the bucket when you look at a big picture situation. So these companies realized that the cloud was a very appealing option, but once they got in, the expectations that they had of what they were going to get didn't meet up with the realities, and they decided they actually had to pull back and remove themselves from the cloud. So we're seeing this more and more often. And here's just kind of a quick graph when you look at long-term data storage. A private cloud, a Spectra offering would be that blue line versus a red line that's kind of the Glacier offering that you could see. And yes, up front you're going to be cheaper, but over time it's much more effective to keep the data personally in-house and then use the cloud for the services that you need. So what are the products that you can keep keep your data on when you get to looking at Spectra's offerings? And I'll pass that over to David to talk through.
Cool. Yeah, so let's talk just a little bit about some of the pieces that Spectra has to offer to enable all of this and protect you for some of these threats that we've been talking about. Obviously, we already started with the basic tape library, the Spectra stack, and again, that expands from the single entry level unit that actually comes in under $10,000. It's actually around $9,000 for the base unit. That's list price for the base unit with a single LTO. I think it's a single LTO 7 drive. You can upgrade that to multiple drives that'll hold up to 42 drives and 560 slots, and you can just go crazy with multiple petabytes of data in one of these things. So that's a great place to start. Obviously, we're not showing you here, but we make significantly larger libraries. If you happen to be one of those that needs, on the order of 5 petabytes or more, then there's larger libraries that really do fit that bill. We've got a 950 that holds up to about, that's the number, 950 slots, 950 tapes, and multiple drives, all the way up to our Big Daddy, the T-Finity, multiple robots, and will hold actually up to 50,000 slots, 50,000 tapes. So interestingly enough, it's a fun number to throw around. Our largest libraries can hold roughly 2.5 exabytes of data. And so we don't have customers that are quite that big. Most people don't build them out, 42 racks wide or 44 racks wide. The most common in that area is 9 or 10 frames, and then you sell a bunch of them to the big guys. And it's interesting. We talked a lot about the cloud. Almost all of the cloud folks use tape as well, and I don't think that's really clear to everybody. Whether you use some local object store or tape in your data center, or you make a copy on the cloud, your data is going to end up on the tape somewhere if you're into long-term storage. Interestingly enough, those tape libraries have been around quite a while, as you know, and they are already certified with probably most of the software that you already use. Commvault, Veeam, Veritas, most of the IBM products all already know how to talk to a tape library natively. And so what's interesting there is most of the time when people decide to go that direction, it's literally just plugging it in and enabling it with the software that you already have. But there is a new trend, as everyone knows, to go to object storage, and the goal there is a variety of things. It's a faster way to access data. It gives you a seamless way to access multiple copies and multiple layers of data without the end user having to know. We treat things as the concept in the object storage world is a bucket concept, very similar to Amazon. The concept in S3, you apply a policy to a bucket, and the user saves their data to a bucket. But in the background, what's really going on is the admin can say, well, that's whatever, engineering data, that's really important. I can't lose that data. I need, you know, a copy on disk for 90 days, and I need a longer term copy on disk for a year for fast access. And I want, you know, as a storage company, we of course dream of people making 12 copies because it's always good for us. But, you know, make a tape copy, make an ejected copy, or what's really interesting there, that line on the right, not only can we do multiple sites with multiple black pearls, this is the object storage gateway, but we can actually drop data directly on the public cloud. So one of the options, I think in the next slide, shows you there are multiple storage targets, and the cloud is actually one of them. So we make a really good gateway that manages your cloud copy, your local copies, and takes care of essentially just making that easier for everybody. We actually combine both NAS and S3 interfaces into the Black Pearl, which we'll show you on the next slide. And the goal here is really to make overall data management simpler. This is not a normal hierarchical storage manager. You're literally making copies and expiring them over time based on whether you need it on that particular layer or not. But the other one that's interesting there is replication. So we have quite a few customers that yeah, fine, I'm using the cloud properly, which means if you're just using it for storage, you know, drop your DR copy on the cloud, no question. But I've got 3 sites here in the US, and they all need to share the same data and have a single interface, essentially a single namespace that sits on top of all of my sites, my cloud copies, my disk copies, my tape copies, and that's exactly what a Black Pearl does for you. There's, on the next one, we'll see there's one other way to use a Black Pearl. You can actually insert disks. So essentially it's a server. It's an appliance that you can plug multiple JBODs of disks into, and then you designate those disks to either be object storage disk, or interestingly here, it can be just straight up NAS. We offer a straight CIFS NFS interface. You can actually stuff it with fast enterprise drives. You can stuff it with flash. There's all kinds of options for that NAS layer, but we also provide a really interesting link between the NAS world and the object world. Instead of trying to make both visible to the same data, we actually treat the NAS as essentially a watch folder. So it's a place where people can drop their stuff, and then overnight it gets shoved into the object storage world automatically for them, and they don't have to worry about what is an S3 interface and does my software, you know, have access to that, and you know, what's the integration. So really great way to integrate those two worlds. Full authentication with normal Active Directory systems, and essentially what we're doing is saying you really don't have to have special knowledge of object store if you want to use object store, and you want to use tape, or you want to use cloud, or long-term disk. We offer some really great tools. Because it's an appliance, we actually don't charge for the browser tools and the interface tools. It's all free. Our goal, quite frankly, is to sell you storage. We want to sell you the object storage. We want to sell you the tape. We want to be your gateway into the cloud. And so we make it really easy to get to all of those layers through this very simple appliance that we call Black Pearl. So that's our answer to, well, how do I integrate those two worlds, cloud and tape, or cloud and local disk, or maybe there's no cloud. Maybe it's just I need multiple copies on disk and tape and an ejected copy and a second site. We take care of all of that through a single central appliance. We're really one of the very few companies out there that offers object storage for tape. Most object storage, as you know, it's still a big disk system. It just provides a different interface on the front. We've taken this about 3 steps further and integrated not just disk, but tape and cloud and multiple sites as well. So those are the pieces that we pull together to make this much easier for you. I think.
Yeah, so that pretty much wraps us up. So just some parting thoughts to keep in mind. As we've said a few times throughout this presentation, the best practice is to keep a local copy. Give yourself options, give yourself freedom, ability to move and change your cloud provider if you want. Give yourselves a little bit of extra protection as far as air gap and hacker ransomware prevention. And then find good cloud storage that may be used appropriately. Use it for disaster recovery, use it for not recall, no storage recall fees. That's just where the cloud gets you. It always adds up, and it adds up quickly. Keep data at 2 sites. It's really important to have a separation of sites. Air gap, again, is best, but it's not always required. But if you do want to prevent from ransomware, there's no way that somebody can get to the data if it's offline. Owning storage is always going to be the lower cost long term, just because cloud gets you. I mean, anytime you pay a monthly subscription charge, they do that for a reason. And the longer you keep the data there, the more it adds up, and your data grows. And then all of a sudden you need to access it, and you can get hit with unexpected bills as well. So keeping a local copy, finding ways to effectively use the cloud for where it's good at, for distribution, transcoding, compute power, that's where it's at, not for storage. And just pure storage cloud is really not a fantastic option for anybody. You're going to get hit with recurring storage fees. You're not using the cloud for the most powerful things, and then anytime you have to access it, you're going to get destroyed by get and access fees. So it's kind of the best practices that we have here at Spectra. So